This video is sponsored by Squarespace, the all-in-one platform to build a beautiful online presence. Arcane is hands down the very best thing I watched this year, and I don't mean marginally. I don't mean that it was a polite 8.5 out of 10. Arcane was an absolute triumph, and it is one of the few shows I have ever given a 10 out of 10 to. Hello everyone, and welcome to another video. Today we're going to be speaking all about Arcane, the Netflix animated fantasy phenomenon which came out a few weeks ago and which was produced by Riot Games and based on the lore of the one and only League of Legends. I am here to tell every person who hasn't watched Arcane yet that they really need to go watch Arcane. The quality of this show was a massive surprise to a lot of people, myself included. To be quite clear, I have never once in my life played League of Legends, nor have I ever been particularly interested in playing League of Legends. And yet, Arcane is now probably my favorite animated TV show of all time. I am so sorry to Avatar: The Last Airbender and also Gravity Falls, the two of you have been dethroned. The basic premise of Arcane is that we have two sisters, Vi and Powder, who have lost their parents and who live in the slums of the glamorous city of Piltover. Piltover itself is this beautiful steampunk-esque early 20th century city. However, contrasting with the prosperity and polish of Piltover are the slums of the city, which are also referred to as Zorn. Zorn is represented as the low socioeconomic lesser of Piltover in a range of different ways, from the nickname as the Undercity to the fact that it's literally beneath Piltover. Zorn is the place where the people fall through the cracks. And so the juxtaposition or the contrast of Piltover and Zorn are central to the conflict of this TV show. Now the story threads also add to this conflict. Although we begin the story with Vi and Powder in the Undercity, we quickly learn more about characters from the Upper City. We also begin to follow the story of Jace, who is a young scientist interested in harnessing the power of magic. We're soon introduced to the significant political players of these contrasting worlds, and the conflict that is rising here as each side tries to wrestle control away from the other. Before we jump into what specifically makes Arcane such a triumph, I did quickly want to thank the sponsor of this video, which is Squarespace. Squarespace is a website builder which allows people to create dynamic, interesting, and beautiful websites. You may or may not know by now that my website was made through Squarespace. In addition to it being affordable and wonderful just generally, Squarespace has heaps of benefits such as its blogging tools and in-depth analytics. It's honestly the perfect platform to help you share your work and to connect with the people who are interested in the things that you make. If you're looking to make a website, head to squarespace.com for a free trial. And when you're ready to launch, go to squarespace.com/ChristyAnnJones to save 10% off your purchase of a website or domain. Straight off the bat, the best decision Arcane made was to make an animated show. Now, in some ways, this might also be the commercial downfall of Arcane. For some reason, we still live in an entertainment culture in which significant portions of the general population persistently avoid animated content, and so animated television often has a lot more trouble cutting through to a mass audience. And I would hazard a pretty strong guess that if Arcane was live action and receiving the immense critical acclaim that it's currently receiving, it would be absolutely everywhere by now. However, it is the animation itself which is the strongest part of Arcane. Every single detail, every facial expression, every music video that's shoehorned in makes this show magical in a way that would not have been possible with live action. The actual animation side of Arcane was done by the French studio Fortiche, which Riot had previously worked with. Instead of everything being 3D, which is, typical of a 3D animated TV show, we have these beautiful digitally painted backgrounds contrasting with 3D characters who have 2D painterly textures placed on top of them. And so the end result is that we have this beautiful marriage of really textured painterly 2D art with the depth and realism of 3D characters. Now, in order to save time with the animation, Fortiche could have done mocapping. This is when you use real people to help inform the movements of the 3D character models. However, in order to achieve the outstanding outcome that they did, instead, Fortiche decided to do keyframe animation. Fortiche's director of animation said, "Our goal was to find a good balance between realism and cartoon style. Our characters have to move and behave in a realistic way, but to keep the appeal and avoid any uncanny valley effect, we also had to bring traditional animation techniques. Only keyframe animation allows us to control our acting, performance, and aesthetic. And as a result of this painstaking hard work, Arcane has the best 3D animation I have ever seen." Because of the significant attention to detail with the animation, the characters feel incredibly real. We can see so much about their personalities through the animation. It is immediately expressed that Vi is an assertive, natural leader, and we see this because of how she holds herself and how the other characters react to her. And compared with other recent examples of 3D animated TV shows, it's really easy to see the jump that Arcane has made in terms of expressivity and attention to detail. Even background characters are distinctive and unique, with their facial expressions hinting at complex and completely believable interior worlds beyond the story. And so the wonderful thing about the animation here is that it's incredibly beautiful, but it's also really lifelike and believable, and that believability strengthens our ability to identify with the characters and heightens the dramatic and emotional payoffs later on in the season. And this is the type of thing that happens in live action as well. When you have really good actors that really seem to embody the characters, it creates a true emotional connection because you feel like the world is real. What was particularly amazing about Arcane is how quickly they established this. I was blown away by how much I cared about Vi and Powder by the end of the 3rd episode, even though I'd never once played League of Legends. The writing of this show was also absolutely wonderful. The dialogue was careful and considered, it avoided cliche and masterfully propelled the plot and character growth forward. Arcane's biggest strength by far is how good the visual storytelling is. And so it was excellent that the verbal storytelling, i.e. the dialogue, didn't in any way detract from this or repeat things that had already been communicated through the visual storytelling. It doesn't once over-explain how the audience is supposed to feel about the characters. Arcane shows instead of tells, leaving the audience to interpret the nuances of each character on their own. Arcane was also excellent in how it avoided narrative tropes to prolong conflict. For example, without getting into spoiler territory, every single time I thought a character was going to conveniently miss meeting up again with another character, or if they were going to, in a very tropey way, miscommunicate in order to create conflict, this did not happen. Every time I thought it would happen, the writers subverted my expectations, and so it's almost like Arcane acknowledged those conflict tropes and then just completely decided to subvert them, which I absolutely loved. Arcane is chopped up into 3 distinctive narrative arcs. Each episode is only 40 minutes long, and there's only 9 episodes, and within these 9 episodes, we're exploring the complex character journeys of a range of different people. And so in order to have satisfying character arcs with meaningful character development, there's actually very little space to work with within the time frame that they have. And so one of the most beautiful things about this story is how wonderfully concise it is. The pacing is incredibly quick, and because there's so much going on constantly, and because you feel so engaged while you're watching it, you end up missing a lot of really clever details and moments of foreshadowing, which make rewatching the show after you finish season 1 absolutely delightful. Now contrast this with how engaging the opening fight scene was of Cowboy Bebop. With Arcane, the pacing is so fast, it's so engaging, and sitting down for 40 minutes feels like absolutely nothing. However, with this one fight scene of Cowboy Bebop, before the opening credits even rolled, I felt like I was watching it for 30 hours. I cannot in words describe how good the world building is here. I previously mentioned the juxtaposition between Piltover and Zorn and how beautifully that was done. The theme of class segregation and wealth privilege is really cleverly explored in this sort of Parasite-esque use of physical levels within the setting. Here, the upper class is literally higher than the lower class. However, beyond this sort of surface level symbolism, Arcane also explores morality and the binary opposite ideas of good and evil and how this is linked together. Piltover presents as the bright, idealized, perfect world that people should aspire to be a part of. The colors are white and blue and gold, and so this setting is characterized as being heavenly, whereas Zorn is the exact opposite. The colors are very dark, like acid green, scarlet red. It's very, very sinister. And so this setting is positioned as being the underworld. And on either ends of this physical spectrum, we have the political leaders of this world. And so the Council of Piltover is very high up in the sky in the council chambers, and Silco is deep beneath the Undercity in his lair. The show explores the possibility of these two worlds mingling and coming together. But as Vi mentions later on in the series, series, it's like oil and water, they do not mix. As the show progresses, we see that what is good and what is bad, Piltover versus Zorn, everything is actually quite nuanced. There's corruption in Piltover, and even in Zorn there are moments of great kindness and community. This is just one teeny tiny little example, but there's so much more. Even in the mise en scène, which is the objects and things that are placed around the settings, there's so much foreshadowing, and it's so revealing of the characters and the world. And throughout the show, particularly because we get access to the political decision makers of this world, we get to find out so much about trade and economics, Piltover's relationships with cities outside. It really does feel like this setting is grounded in a huge, complex, interesting, vibrant world. And that honestly makes me so excited for the possibilities of season 2. Silco is my favorite villain that I've watched in recent memory. He does terrible things, most of which actually end up happening off screen. He's clearly a terrible person, like he's a super bad dude, and he's definitively the bad guy of this show. However, he's also loving and he feels like a real person. And so even though he fulfills the role of the bad guy, I empathize with him so strongly. And in the same vein, but on the other side of the coin, our heroes make terrible mistakes which end up hurting people. There are consequences to their actions. And so in Arcane, the characters do not have plot armor specifically because they're fulfilling a narrative archetype. Now, this is what Game of Thrones did so well in the first season. With the death of their archetypal hero in season 1 / in the first book, Game of Thrones did the thing that nobody was expecting. They subverted the narrative archetype of having a hero persist until the end. That show did something incredibly subversive, and it created a world where no one felt safe and people's actions had consequences until season 8. In Arcane, I feel like people's actions truly do have consequences. No one is a cut and dry typical hero. They all have flaws and they are all very interesting. Of course, there is an additional layer here. If you have played the game and you are familiar with the lore, then you have greater insight into who will survive and where people will end up because you have that backstory. But for me, as a person who had never played League of Legends, I had no idea what was going to happen next. The representations of women in the show was just chef's kiss excellent. I loved it so incredibly much. In Arcane, we got to see a range of female characters, some of whom were traditionally feminine and many of whom were not traditionally feminine, but all of whom were in varying positions of power. Often in fantasy and popular media, in order to be powerful, in order to have agency and make decisions within their world, women have to be tomboyish, or they have to throw off behaviors and traits typically associated with femininity, such as wearing skirts and dresses and liking things that are girly and stuff like that. And it's also often the case, particularly within fantasy, that women don't tend to have fleshed out relationships with other women. Girls don't often get to have female friends, and if there's two sisters, you can bet that one of them is a tomboy who hates sewing, and generally they'll both hate each other. However, Arcane made the decision to place women in positions of power irrespective of how feminine they were, which completely dismantled this common power dynamic that we so often see in fantasy and sci-fi and many other genres of storytelling. Here we can also see a number of well-developed relationships between female characters, particularly between Vi and Powder, and also later on Vi and Caitlyn as well. This sounds really simple and like I'm setting the bar particularly low, but it's not a thing that tends to be done very well across the board, and Arcane did an absolutely excellent job at it. Arcane is an absolute triumph of animation, fantasy, and storytelling in general. It is beautiful and emotional and thought-provoking. The way the show explores trauma and love is deeply profound. The way that Arcane wove music into the narrative was absolutely amazing. Even the editing and camera work, which is not something you tend to typically think about with animation, was just absolutely wonderful because it felt like there was a person actually there with a camera watching everything. It felt so lifelike and real and interesting, and I have so many adjectives. I just fucking love it. It was so good. Honestly, like I didn't even expect to enjoy this show, and I was so blown away, and it's now my favorite animated TV show of all time. God, I hope I've convinced you to go watch Arcane because it's just so good. Thank you so very much for watching this video, and also an enormous thank you to everyone over on Patreon for supporting my channel. We have a lot of interesting, lovely bonus content over there, so if you're interested in checking out Patreon, feel free to click the link in the description down below. Take care everyone, and I will see you next time. Bye bye.